Hello everyone, I welcome you all to Small Talk with the Etsy Collective, an initiative to bring you closer to the change makers, industry veterans, and Etsy sellers, and give you an opportunity to listen to their thoughts, ideas, and find some inspiration that we all need. I'm very happy to share with you that this year in August, we completed 2 years of the Etsy Collective. Thank you so much for coming along with us in this journey. Your love and enthusiasm is what keeps us going. Here's a short video to celebrate this milestone.
Hello everybody, we have completed 2 years of Etsy Collective. It has just been an incredible way for people to connect. Etsy's mission is keep commerce human, and I believe that Etsy Collective has been able to work towards that mission and serve that mission in a very effective manner. Here's to 2 years of Etsy Collective and many more to come. I believe that this is absolutely the best platform to keep commerce human in addition to being online on Etsy.com.
Congratulations, Etsy, on completing 2 years of the collective.
This is an amazing milestone. Kudos to you guys. Congratulations.
Has to be the first collective which we had in Bikaner House. I was invited to the event and I absolutely loved it.
I so vividly remember that when I walked into the room, there was so much energy, there was so much enthusiasm. That itself became such an amazing memory for me.
DIY session at the end of the workshop, I think it's really a stress buster that you get involved, you learn, and you leave the session with a souvenir.
There's so much to learn from so many creative geniuses.
I'm sure it adds a lot of value and provides a lot of insight into the many facets of this industry.
Etsy India team really took on the challenge of making the lockdown successful and informative and educative for all their Etsy sellers.
The entire Etsy team, keep rocking, you guys are doing great.
And thank you for keeping commerce human.
Hope you liked watching that video. Which brings us for me to introduce you to the team behind this session. We have Sunanda Krishna. She is the PR and marketing lead of Etsy in India. Etsy Collective has been her passion project for the last 2 years and something she never gets tired of speaking about. And she has been a constant support to make this event a success. We welcome you. Then we have Ria with us. She's also part of the marketing team and a behind the scenes stars for this session, and she'll be answering you all in the chat box. Followed by Anushka. She's part of the seller growth team and she will answer a lot of questions in the second half of the session. Her team has helped hundreds of sellers to put their Etsy shops up for business on Etsy. So stay tuned for that. And finally, I'm Radhika. I am part of the PR and marketing team and I'll be your host this evening. Which brings me to the very special guest of today, Ms. Rajeshwari from Etsy shop, the Far East Art Studio. Rajeshwari works closely with weavers, social organization, cooperatives to design and strive to create some of the best saris, fabrics, and sometimes makes contemporary fashion clothing for them. Thank you so much for joining us for this session.
Thank you, Radhika, and hi, everyone.
Next up is the agenda for today's session, which is a little bit information about Etsy, who we are and what we do. A fireside conversation with our seller Rajeshwari, and followed by a Q&A segment with Etsy team and Rajeshwari. So make sure that you type down your questions for us in the chat box and we'll be answering them very soon. So Etsy is a global marketplace for unique and handcrafted products. We provide creative entrepreneurs a platform to showcase their work to people from more than 80 countries in the world. We're the only marketplace which focuses on creative entrepreneurs, and we help our community of sellers turn their ideas into successful businesses. Our platform connects to our sellers with buyers looking for an alternative for something special with a human touch for those moments who deserve imagination. We connect to millions of buyers and sellers from nearly every country in the world. Currently, we have 2.8 million active sellers all across the world, selling more than 66 million products to over 46 million active buyers. In the time when automation is increasing so much, our mission is to keep the human connection in the heart of commerce. That's why we've built a community that lives and thrives because it is empowered by people like yourselves. In 2019, Etsy became the first e-commerce platform to offset 100% of its carbon emissions from shipping. For every item shipped in our marketplace, Etsy automatically invests in an environmental project to offset these emissions. Since 2019, we've offset over 173,000 metric tons of CO2, which is equivalent to 20,000 homes' energy use for a year or charging 22 billion smartphones. It's not just us as a company who feel responsible for the carbon footprint, but 90% of our buyers say that environmental sustainability is very important to them. There are three major categories under which you can sell your products on Etsy. First one being the handmade category. As the name suggests, anything that you design or make on your own comes under this category. And this is the biggest category of our sale on Etsy. Next up is the vintage category. Anything that is 20 years old or older in its product age can be sold under this category. And finally, craft supplies, anything which can be used to make something new. For instance, fabrics, gemstone, buttons. And this is the only category we allow bulk sales in. Lastly, I want to share some trivia about that Etsy is built to encourage entrepreneurship. You might find it interesting that 95% of our sellers work out of our homes. 53% of the total sellers sold their first goods on Etsy. 83% of sellers are women, and 90% of sellers are businesses of one. There is a reason that Etsy and entrepreneurs pick and choose Etsy because entrepreneurship begins with you. That's why we think all the decisions regarding your shop should be made by you, starting from the price of your product that you want to charge to the shop policies, shipment, returns, refunds. We also have a lot of seller services tools which will help you start, manage, and scale your business. Our company was founded back in 2005 and our headquarters is in Brooklyn, New York. We started our corporate office in India in 2018 in New Delhi. Since then, we've tried to engage with the creative community, and Etsy Collective as an event is a result of this objective. Our aim with the Etsy Collective is to build a community of artistic individuals who are curious about Etsy as a platform and want to explore it. Now we've completed over 100 sessions of the Etsy Collective, and these are the places we've went for an offline session. I want to show a small video of an Etsy Collective to give you a glimpse of the experience that hopefully we have in store for you not too far in the future.
I think Etsy was one of the first steps I took, which brought my passion out of just seeing a passion and into something which could give me, actual money. The ease with which anybody today can take any skill they have and monetize that and turn it into a brand, which is amazing. It means that anybody who has a skill can make it more than just a hobby.
From the roof of our cars, letting go of our hearts. Close your eyes, pretend that it's your first kiss. Darling, can you feel it? Oh, so ignorant bliss. Oh, the whole night through.
We're not just about selling. Etsy is really about building a community of creative people. And what we've done in India is since last year is that we try through the Etsy Collective to meet with different creative people in different parts of the country. So far we've done about 32 collectives. Almost all the bigger cities we've covered, and now we aim to go to the smaller cities and interact with creative people.
It was great, quite informative. It was worth it.
It's always good to be around Etsy people and the entire communities.
People are very welcoming, and this workshop, everything was good.
Hope you all enjoyed watching that. Thank you so much, Rajeshwari, which brings us to the next segment of our session, which is about having a conversation with you about the timeless appeal of traditional textiles. So before we start off with the conversation, we would like to know what is the background? Do you come from a design background?
So basically, the Far East Art Studio is a family-run textile studio, but all four of us, like my parents, my husband and I, none of us come from a design background. We have a pure technology background. But having said that, I think as a result, our design process is slightly unconventional. Firstly, we were always very interested and enchanted by textiles. So a Far East Art Studio kind of just happened to us. And as I said, like with our design approach, because we don't come from a traditional design background, it's very unconventional. And as an anecdote, I think I'll try share an incident. So I think when we just started off and started making textiles, my mother was very firm on her belief that whatever we make should be clothes that we would like to wear ourselves and not just something which others, it's the trend or the fashion of the time, etc. So we started making a traditional weave called dhone khali and also tangail, which is kind of the indigenous weaves of Bengal. And at the time, I was very apprehensive because I was not sure. I didn't see anyone around me wearing those. And I was wondering, will anyone buy these? But then she was quite sure. So I said, okay, fine, let's just do it. And I remember very half-heartedly putting it out on Etsy as a listing and thinking, this is not going to sell, I'm sure. And was very pleasantly surprised when within a week, it was a small collection, but within a week, everything was sold. And not only that, most of our patrons or customers at the time who had just discovered us on Etsy, they wrote to us specifically to say that, please keep doing these things because it's beautiful and we haven't seen these in a long time. So that kind of made me realize that the way of thinking that we were in was something that would definitely work. And as I always say, or as we always believe, like traditional is something which is timeless. So it doesn't matter, even if no one's wearing it, they will wear it once you present it to them.
Perfect. I think that's amazing because that's the thing about traditional wear. You can never get too much of a traditional wear because it's always classic and always timeless. So that's amazing to know. I think you've already answered a little bit of my second question, which is about idea of starting Far East Art Studio. But how did you come up with this name, this very unique name, and what inspired you?
Sure. So as I was mentioning, my mother has a very good eye for design. In fact, in our family, she's the one who's always been curating our textiles for home or, our wardrobe, etc. So I always wanted her to do something. But actually, Far East Art Studio started when my husband and we were traveling to Kathmandu in Nepal. And we came across this beautiful paintings called Mithila paintings. They were on handmade paper. And we thought we'll buy these and make photo frames or mirrors out of them. And they would look amazing because we hadn't really you see the Madhumani painting, but the Mithila painting is kind of similar, but in a different region. So we thought this would be amazing. And more importantly, because we were based out of London, we thought this would be a place where we would bring in crafts from the Far East being Asia. So that's how the name, the Far East Art Studio, kind of came in. And started, but obviously we didn't keep doing the Mithila painting things. Soon enough, we actually started with my mother's help. We used her expertise and her design knowledge to kind of venture into textiles. I think that's really when our journey started.
Wow. I think these are some of your amazing designs that I've presented.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing these lovely pictures.
Thank you.
I think every single one of these pieces are looking amazing. And I think I being very much into traditional wear, I would love to wear something like this.
You're always welcome. Thank you.
So my next question is about, your shop is a great example of a family run business. So who all are involved in this and how do you divide roles between yourselves?
Okay, that's interesting because ours is like a typical startup where everyone has to do everything actually. But I think practically speaking, over time, like we've kind of have started playing to our strength, and we found out who's good in what. So my mother, obviously, she's the chief of design and curation, and she's the one who has the right last word about what we are making and what we are curating, the design, etc. And I kind of assist her on and off these days. Uh, my father, he looks after the day-to-day operations of the studio. For a long time, up until recently, he was also the part-time photographer. So he was the one taking photos of all our products.
Wow.
My husband and I, because we come from a technology background, pure technology background, so we used kind of our expertise in social media and marketing, and we kind of tried to bring in that element and start posting on Instagram, start doing the marketing around it and other social media platforms. So I think that's where we are. And finally, I think we found a forte, and we know that what each of us is doing, and we kind of use each other and help each other.
Yeah, I think everybody is like a wheel in this car that you're
Exactly.
running together.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
The next thing that I would like to know, that why did you choose to sell online and on Etsy out of all the other options, and how has your Etsy experience been so far?
Okay, so being a startup, honestly, we didn't want to invest too much of money into anything, not a brick and mortar shop, and not even like our own website, etc. So effectively, because as a team, all of us, we also had our day jobs, and we still have our day jobs. We needed a place where we would get the kind of audience whose aesthetics would match ours. And as buyers, we were already on Etsy because we were buying a lot of things from Etsy around the time. So we thought, and also coming from the technology background, we thought a platform like Etsy, where you actually literally set up your own shop without having to do anything, is perfect for us. And initially, we thought we'll just try it out and see. And I think, mentioning earlier that, at the time when we started selling textiles or saris on Etsy, there was no one selling saris, or maybe one or two. So we didn't really know whether this was going to be the platform, but eventually for us, we were pleasantly surprised, because not only sari buyers, like people who are buying saris for themselves to wear, found us, but we also were discovered by a lot of people like textile collectors, interior designers, etc., who actually reached out to us to buy these traditional textiles. So I think that's how our journey started with Etsy. That, along with Instagram, kind of like we were able to tell our stories very clearly.
Wow, I think like being there on different social media handles and then directing your customers to your Etsy shop is the best way, because both of them can work together in your storytelling and showing your products. So I think that's a great thing that you've done. The next thing that I would like to ask is about what are some of the best things that come along with working with Indian traditional textiles, and can you share some of the rare examples of the textiles that you make?
Sure. So I think there are three aspects to it that I would like to highlight. So one thing is, over the years, we started realizing that one of the areas that we would really want to focus on is to recreate old designs, which means that we actually started reading, studying old textile, which was made in the 19th, 18th century, is now in the museum, etc. And we started reading about them. But more we read about them, we actually not only learned about the textile itself, but also about the history, the socioeconomic background of the time, the relevance, etc., which in a way then became part of our story whenever we recreated anything out, like we recreated an old design into new. So that is one thing, obviously. The second is what is in the heart of our studio, which is the craftsmen and the artisans. So what actually happened was, every time we started recreating an old design and recreating it into new, we not only did our own research, but we took a lot of guidance and help and, guidance from all the craftsmen and artisans who we were working with. They gave us a lot more insights about these textiles, much more than books could tell. So they would actually have stories about how their great grandmother wore this pattern of the sari when she got married and came into the family. So, there were these anecdotes which added on to then our narrative and became a part of us. And not only that, it was while interacting and traveling extensively all over India. We also traveled to Bangladesh nowadays. We actually learned so much more about the culture of the place, the people. And I think we're very fortunate to be able to connect not only to great craftsmen, but also to great human beings who have taught us so much more about life. I think that's one big, big asset that we have as part of the Far East Art Studio. The third is very conscious buyers. So for example, one of the aspects that we work on, and we, from the very beginning, because this was more of a passion and not a business, even when we started, we knew that one thing that we had to do was to make sure that people who we are working with are always happy, because you make the best of crafts only when the person making it is really happy and content. So we consciously made a decision that, from day one, we would never engage in a way that our craftsmen were not happy or were not well paid. So from day one, our ethics has been that anytime we make a product or we buy a product, we would pay them upfront. And not only that, we would pay them the fair price of the product. And where we can, in a very small ways, we would also try to, give back to their daily lives or to their society for the betterment of the society in whichever very small ways that we can, because we are a very small studio. So that was one of the ways which we connected, and our buyers actually also connected to us in the same way. They were very appreciative of the fact that we were doing these things. And even during COVID, we got so many custom orders for all our saris, because they were conscious of the fact that if we don't get the orders, our weavers will not get the orders. So all of them actually wrote to us to understand how were our weavers doing. And then there was they had time to make some saris. They were happy to place orders, wait for months before it was shipped. So yeah, I think these are the things which has been a blessing. And I think that, along with traveling all over India and Asia, discovering good food in the gullies, I think it's been a blessing, the whole journey.
I think that's amazing to know. And I can see in front of me that you've also created this beautiful sari from the 19th century. We would love to know a little bit about this as well.
Yeah, so this is a 19th century sari, a Baluchari sari that was made by Sri Dubraj Das. It's in the Indian Museum in Kolkata. So I think when we came across the sari in Google Arts, actually, this was during lockdown, effectively. So we started talking to a master weaver, and then he was like, okay, we have to study the design very intently. Now, we were all not co-located, because I was in London, isolated. He was in Benares. So it was all like collaborative work that we did over WhatsApp, etc., that we started recreating this sari. And we did a lot of permutation and combination of the color to get it right, the design, etc. And we were not sure how it would be taken by, the customers. But when we launched the sari, I think we got so many messages of people who were very glad that we had recreated such a sari, that we got all the more encouragement to do such things in the future. And I think absolutely love this sari. It's a perfect bridal sari, which tells a great story. It's a recreation of an original Baluchari and rarely made. And in fact, later during the session, I'll show you the sari. I have it with me. So yeah.
Wow, I think we would love to see it live as well. I think this is beautiful work, and I can see how intricate this work is. I'm sure it took so much time and effort to make this.
Absolutely, and it was a very fulfilling journey from the design process till making it, and then finally when I got to see it a few weeks back, when I actually had it with me, and it was just amazing. I think this is one sari probably I'll feel very sad to part with. Yeah.
Wow, amazing.
So this is again another Baluchari, and there are these stories that you don't know when you look at a textile unless you have read about the history of it. So for example, in this one, if you see, in the line of paisleys at the bottom, there's one in the center which has a different color. And there's an anecdote which goes in that the weaver used to actually do this on purpose, so that it would, ward away the evil eye. So it used to be called the Nazar Battu, so that Nazar na lage. So he used to put that different color. So people would think this is actually a defect, but actually he's doing it on purpose to bring in that element of, kisi ka nazar na lage. So I think this is one example.
This is beautiful. I think, wow, are these stories also very popular in the area, or do you also like do like tell people while people are placing orders for these sarees?
Yeah, so one thing that we always do is, we write these stories, whether on social media or also on Etsy when we do the description. And I think that probably is one of the reason people buy certain sarees. I would say it's not necessarily that it'll look good on me. It's a blue color. It'll go, I like blue. It's not that, but I think it's the stories which are attached to the textile that are there. And it's a very traditional one, again, I think probably from the 19th century that has been recreated. And yeah, so now we have got a few orders of the same sari in different colors that people choose, and more traditional colors as well. So yeah, I think it's an interesting journey making these textile with so much story attached to them and so much history attached to them.
I think, yeah, that's amazing that even, while recreating, you're keeping the story intact by doing the same thing which happened centuries ago. So I think, it's amazing.
Yeah, so this is some of the work that we are currently doing in Dhaka in Bangladesh. And again, I think the journey has been pretty amazing, where we've actually tried to make certain things that are there in museums, and also make Dhakai Jamdanis in their true and original form, and very traditional ones. And again, in this as well, we have seen a great response, and the connection that we have while collaborating with the weavers is amazing. I remember during COVID, the weavers would actually call me and say that you are so far away from your parents, but we are close by. It's just that we can't travel to Calcutta to meet your parents. Otherwise, we would be there for them, because you can't be there for them right now. And I think at that point of time, it really made me realize that, this is the best part of doing the Far East Art Studio, being able to connect with amazing people who have such pure soul. And so are our patrons, I think. I mean, all of them, or even people on social media, they're always appreciating. And that's a huge thing, I think, much more than even buying a textile, just the appreciation. Yeah, so I think these are some of the Dhakai Jamdanis that are being made, some very intricate ones actually, that you can see on the screen.
Great. I think that's wonderful to know, and I think it's your efforts that your viewers are also reciprocating the same love that you show towards them as well. And it's always amazing to treat the people that you're working with a lot of respect, and show them that we care for you, and do something for them. Actually, that's something which is about my next question, is that you work closely with your artisans and weavers. So how do you keep them involved in the design process, so that they also bring in their aspects of design, design thinking, design elements, anything interesting that you also learn from them on a daily basis?
Yeah. That's a very interesting question, because the process is very, very collaborative. And what we do is, whenever we take up a new design, we first try to talk to them and understand the relevance. Say, for example, there is a paisley that we are making on a sari. So rather like the information that you will get on the internet or through books, etc., is limited. But if you ask them, can you make a paisley in a certain way? And then they will say, paisleys are not generally made in that way. For instance, I'm just giving an example, because the reason why the paisleys have some kind of a historical significance or cultural significance. So I think that is where their inputs come in very, very handy, and they almost guide us through the design process. What we bring into the table is our aesthetics. Say, for example, there are lots of traditional textiles, but not everything will suit your aesthetics or suit our aesthetics, because we believe in a completely different design principle, wherein like we would like to create what we would like to wear, in effect. So as you can see here, there are some bhujodi saris, and when we actually started making these saris, there were already some Bhujodi saris out there. Traditionally, Bhujodi weavers, they make shawls, and the shawls are very beautiful. They're rustic, they're nice. But every time we looked at a sari, we thought, no, but this is nowhere close to a shawl. The shawl is so very exquisite. So then we started talking to our Bhujodi weaver, Munshi Bhai, and we said that how can we make the sari look like the shawls? Then he said they are not really being made, etc. And we have never made them. So we said, why don't we try making them look like the shawl? And then we started working with different material. And in the sari on the right, I think, there is an indigo sari, which is on display. That sari has been made by tassar and wool. And all the traditional shawls are made by tassar and wool. And that's why they have such a rustic look, where the saris don't, because they are either made in cotton or on silk. So that's when we brought in our design thinking, or our aesthetic, saying that if we have to make them look as exquisite as that, what is it that we can introduce in the saris for them to look as beautiful? So then we created these Bhujodi saris. When we created them, and we're really bad, not really good with marketing, etc. So we didn't have a hype created around it saying that we are launching this great Bhujodi saris, but we launched the first 7 of them, 7 different designs. And within 2 minutes, all of them were sold. And we were so stunned and we were shocked, and we didn't even think they were as good as people thought them to be. And each one, when they received the saris, they thought that they were really good and they were like an asset to them. So it was a really good design a collaboration that we had with the weaver. And then later we started experimenting. As you see, one other indigo sari on the center, we realized people in India can't wear tassar and wool. So how do you actually make a sari which is as rustic, but someone in India can wear it? So we started making on Kala cotton. So this is the way I think all of us, then our weaver, Munshi Bhai, he would give us inputs about what are the different traditional patterns and what's significance about the traditional patterns, and we'll introduce them slowly in our saris. And if you go to the next slide, we've done something very similar with Ajrak as well. So again, this is the one block that you see along with a red part of a textile is me wearing a kurta, and I'm holding the same block out of which this kurta was made. Wow. And we actually introduced the traditional, not introduced, I would say, we made some saris wherein we would bring in the traditional Ajrak patterns onto the saris, and we would just make them based on our aesthetic. So keeping it very in line with traditional motifs, etc., but something that suits our aesthetics. And once we did these two, we actually brought in both the Ajrak weaver and Bhujodi Ajrak printer, Rauf Bhai, and Bhujodi weaver, Munshi Bhai, to London. And then they showcased their collection along with us. And they conducted workshops in London where they would actually teach all interested people about the craft itself. So if you go to the next slide, I think there are some glimpses from these exhibitions. So here you can see there is a lady who's weaving, and she had, this exhibition was in London, and she had traveled from New York to be part of the workshops. Wow. So she flew in the day the workshop started, and she did both the workshops. One was weaving, another was printing, and she's done both the workshops along with us, as well as there were lots of people from museums who were curators, textile enthusiasts, textile experts, who had taken part in these exhibitions and workshops. They were also there at the Nehru Center, which is the cultural wing of the Indian High Commission, and there was an exclusive reception for them there, just so that, you know, they also feel as much a part of the Far East Art Studio as us, because after all, like, we are one big family.
Exactly. I think this whole process must have been so fulfilling for you and them as well, that yes, both of you learned so much. The audience must be enjoying, you know, actually talking to the weavers, the maker of that sari. And I'm sure this and I can definitely see, you know, a weaver conducting the workshop as well here in the.
We got a lot of interest. Like, people said they had a lot of ideas to go back with. So they said that, you know, next time we should make it even better like this, and, you know, this is how we can improve the workshops or the exhibition. Similarly, a lot of people who came to these workshops said they would be interested in learning, or being part of workshops with other crafts like Jamdani, etc. So yeah, it was a very good. And parallelly also on Etsy, we did a pop-up where we would actually sell the ones which we had designed in the process, and that were part of the exhibition in London, because obviously we had people all over the world who were interested in buying these, but they were not present in London. So yes, it was a very interesting. We've done it for about 3 years until COVID, I think.
Okay, that's great to know. I think these are again some of your originals.
Yes, so this is Patan Patola, and this is Mr. Salvi in the center, and they are my friends who had worn it, and they were the models. And these are double ickats, and he was also present in London, and he had also conducted a workshop where people learned about Patola weaving. So yes, so that's
such a beautiful story, and I think that must have been a great experience for you as well. So my next question is about, a lot of people might be unaware of the fact that saris are also used for other purposes, like, for home decor and all these things. So let us know how your buyers utilize your original Farista Studio saris.
Yeah, it's been a very, it's also been a discovery for us, because when we were making saris, we didn't really have anyone in mind. We always thought it's probably people who wear saris are the ones who are going to buy it. I think the first time we realized that this was not the case is when we used the dhonekalis that we had made initially to make some cushion covers. And I was in an exhibition in London, and everyone who walked into the room, they just picked up this and said, wow, this is amazing. And that's when we kind of realized, yes, these traditional patterns or designs or weaves are not really limited to being used as saris. Having said that, sari is obviously a very versatile garment, and that's why we are in it, because there's no size. There is nothing. There's just one size fits all, and you can drape it in so many ways, and you wear it in so many ways. A 16-year-old can wear it, and a 36-year-old can wear it equally well. So I think that's one thing. But every time we actually launched a new weave, say for example, once we launched Moirang Fi, which is a traditional weave from Manipur. And what happened was the entire collection was bought by people who were non-sari wearers. And there were people who were textile collectors. There were people who were using it for interiors, like they make really good drapes on your window, etc. Similarly, with our Jamdani, with almost all textiles, we have seen that it's not just people who wear saris, who buy our saris especially, but also people who are interested in crafts on reading the story, or people who are collectors of good textile. So they are the ones who buy the saris. Also people who work on interiors with exclusive clienteles, etc. They are the ones using it for interiors in different ways. So yeah, I think once we started making them, we definitely realized that it was not just limited to wearers of saris, Asian wearers of saris. There were many more people who would buy saris and use them in different ways.
Yeah, I think if I look at some of the designs that you had shown us in the presentation, if we imagine them putting in some of our backgrounds, it would just amp up. Yeah, I think.
Yeah, I have one.
Exactly. So I've been eyeing that since the start of the session. I think that looks beautiful, and it not only is a beautiful work, but it also enhances the look and feel of the room. And I'm like, us wearing, always thinking of saris as something that we wear. I think it's definitely a new discovery for, I think, a lot of people in the audience and myself as well. So thank you for sharing that. And finally, my last question is about any piece of advice that you would like to give to the audience for someone who wants to start off their Etsy shop, anything that they should make a note of.
So I think as an entrepreneur, first thing I would want to say is, whenever you have an idea, just start. Don't think too much about it, because if you're starting on Etsy, it's really easy to start. Like there is absolutely no setup time. Maybe in a day or so, you'll be all up and running. And so you can really test the market out and see whether whatever you're making is doing well, etc. The second thing, obviously, is stick to it. Like, don't wait for a week and say, no, I'm going to give up. because we have seen that, because we didn't have a lot of time probably to think about, okay, shall we do it or not? We just kept doing what we were doing. And I think that hard work kind of paid for us, because it resulted in us realizing that if you just stick to what you're doing and believing, there are people out there who realize what you're doing and how authentic what you're making is, and with a lot of love and the stories behind it, they will come and buy it. So I think that's definitely one important thing. And also I think as a seller, I would say use all the features of Etsy, which are very easy to use. Say for the example, the description where you can add your stories. For example, I think I wanted to show you some of the saris. So this is one sari. It has, so it's a very traditional baluchari, and it has two Nawabs in a train, and they are going. And these are again some of the patterns that were from the 19th century that we have made. So as you can see, it's hand woven completely. It's made with resham, and it's a beautiful thing. And I think I've sold more of these to people who are textile collectors on Etsy rather than people who also buy saris, because this can be expensive. So that's one thing. Then let me show you another one, the red sari, which I am always so proud of. So this is the red sari, and as you can see, there are lotuses in the border, and the lotuses are so intricate that you wouldn't believe that it's like, it's resham and it's made by hand. It's so perfect. It looks like embroidery, fine embroidery. And that's exactly what people who bought this sari told us, that, they probably would, keep it and preserve it forever, because it's so, so precious. And I think these are some of the things, and all you have to do is take good photos, show it, and write your story. And I think you should be able to, start off and do really well.
I think looking at your saris, I think everyone in the audience must be feeling the same. But I think your work is beautiful, and the fact that it's so intricate and everything is made to perfection is, I'm sure it takes, just out of curiosity, how much time does it take to make this particular sari that you showed us?
Yeah, it takes a long time. It takes, just to make it takes 3 to 4 months. And then obviously there's, the dyeing of the threads, the finishing, the design itself. So that, it could take up to 4 to 5 months easily. And some of the other ones have taken up to 6 months. So it's not quick and easy, but I think when you see the end result, that's when you realize how beautiful it is, and it's worth the wait.
Exactly. Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing all these beautiful experiences, your design process. I would also like to address a couple of audience questions that we've been receiving. So my first question is from, we have from Meghna, who's asking, how do you create impact of products that you sell on customers' mind? How do you make them be involved in part of the design process, is what I feel she's asking.
Okay. So for example, I'll take an example of, say, for this sari, red sari that we have made. When we made it, obviously, we didn't take anyone's input, because us and the weaver, we were the ones collaborating on the design and the final product. When it actually was made, and we actually wanted to make it red, bridal red, there were a lot of people who were interested in the sari, but bridal red is probably not something that they could wear every day, because they're not prospective brides, for instance. Then they would ask us if it's possible to make it in some other color, and we'd say, yeah, everything is possible if you are ready to wait. So we would go ahead and take a custom order and make them part of the process. Some people would say, I'm not okay with figures on a sari, and then we'd say, oh, why don't we redesign your sari and make it without figures and just paisleys. So, it's a collaborative process also with the buyers, because at the end of the day, you're making what they would want to wear. Just like us, we are making what we would want to wear. Yeah. So I think that's the way we actually take inputs from our buyers, and it's been a very good process. And we take their design inputs if they want something changed, or if they're not comfortable with a particular design, or if they don't want to make a particular sari in zari but in resham. So we then take those inputs and make a sari for them exclusively.
Okay, that's great. Our next question is from Anusurya Ray, who's asking, how do you decide on a selling price for these products and on selling on Etsy? And what are the elements that you keep in mind while pricing the products?
Yeah, so I think the pricing of the product would probably be based on obviously how much you've spent on the product, and as your business, what kind of margin you're working on, what kind of overheads you're working on. Fortunately for us, because we are just a 4-member team, which is our family, and we don't really take salaries for our business, so our overheads are less. So it really like depends on the store or the business that your product prices would differ. But also one thing that you would actually have to consider, no matter what your overheads are, is whatever you're selling, is the price, is your sari worth the price? So that's a very important thing to know. So if you don't think a sari is worth the price just by looking at it, you cannot do any kind of mathematics and put in a price there for the sari. You then have to work out your figures and then decide are you going to take a cut on the margin, for instance. So yeah, so effectively we have also evolved and understood our areas of strength and weakness, and then kind of priced our products effectively.
Okay. The next question is actually from Pallavi, who's asking, in the era of fast fashion, how do you establish traditional designs, and what kind of reception do you have received so far in this process?
I think that's a very good and interesting question. It's very relevant for us as well, because I think when we started off, we were making quite a few things. Like, we were working in Kutch, so we were traveling to Kutch, then we were working in Bengal, then we were working in Kanchipuram. But over time, we've realized that as a 4-member team, it's definitely not possible to do so many things and create so many saris in a year. So now what we have done is we have consciously taken a step back and taken the decision to create saris, one, that we love, and also create saris on order. So effectively there's a sari, and then we can create the same sari for you if you're ready to wait for it. So in that ways, you don't have to keep up. It's not like you're in a race where you have to have thousands of saris in your shop. You can just have 10 saris, but then you can work together with the customer to personalize them or to customize them according to their needs. And these are your core assets, or this is where we want to be. Like we just want to have a shop with 10 things, which we then keep making over and over based on everyone's design needs and everyone's input, and personalize for them so that your sari and the other person's sari is not the same ever, because you have made it like you would want it to be. And I think the reception has been really good. I think because most people are now conscious buyers, and instead of buying hundreds of saris or hundreds of garments, they are actually they have taken a step back, and it's like how it used to be when we were kids, when we would have one sari which would be worn by me, my cousin, my sister, and everyone, and that would be my mother's wedding sari, and each one would get a turn to wear it to a wedding. So it's like the sari that you buy less, but you buy good. So I think that's where everyone is evolving, or everyone is moving towards, and as a business, that's where we are also moving towards.
That's actually good to know that you're also in line of that thinking of having less but having good quality of products. So I'm sure your buyers also resonate with this same value that you have in your brand. So moving on to some of the questions for Anushka, which are more Etsy related. So a lot of people are asking the process of starting an Etsy shop. So if you could just walk us through that, Anushka.
Sure. Sure. So the process of starting a shop on Etsy is very simple and user friendly. Anybody who is not from a technical department, they don't need to do some research. It's very simple to start your shop on Etsy. So I'll just brief you about these steps which you need to follow for opening your shop on Etsy. So first of all, you need to go to a browser, and you can use any browser, or just type etsy.com over there. On the top, you will find the sign in option from which you can do the registration. After doing registration, you will find the 5 steps which you need to follow for opening your shop. The first step is shop preferences, where you need to choose your preferred country, language, and currency. After that, the second step is name your shop, in which you need to name your store, like what you want to put as a name for your store on Etsy, as it's your own virtual shop. And the third one is stock your shop, where you need to list one product, or you need to have one picture, and you need to fill some details. You can change it later on, so that is editable a number of times. The fourth step is how you will get paid. As you know that for Etsy, you need to have a business PayPal account. So you need to mention your email address from which you have your business PayPal over there on this page. So your customers will going to pay on this email ID whenever they place an order. Now the last question is, like the last step is set up billing, where you need to fill your card details, which you can use to pay Etsy bill in future whenever you get any bill. That is also editable. So if in case you want to change it later on, that is editable. So after completing all the 5 steps, you have the open your shop, which is highlighted now. So you can click on open your shop and you'll be live on Etsy. So it's very simple process. And still, if you need any help, we have our team who is helping the sellers to open their store on Etsy, not only opening their store, but also making them comfortable with the platform, guiding them entirely about the dashboard and the listing process, and at the same time handling all their queries. So we have a team. So if you want to start, you can just fill a form. There is which will be there in the chat box, and the concerned person will get in touch with you. And we are also providing the first 30 listings free of cost to our new sellers, so that they can start without investing a single rupee. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Anushka, for that answer. My next question is that Sanjua is asking that is it mandatory for her to have a GST number before starting on Etsy?
No, not really, because Etsy is a platform which is encouraging every artist. So there is no age limit also. Like you can even start at 60s or even there is no age limit. So there is no such compulsion to have a GST number or import-export code. You can even start simply by following the 5 steps, which I have already explained. But there is a slight difference in the prices, which I'll explain you. So if you have a GST number, you only need to pay, like I'll tell you about the charges, what we have on Etsy. There are 2 types of charges, listing fees and the transaction fee, which is a marketing commission. So listing fee is 20 cents for each product, and the shelf life of a listing is 4 months, which is 120 days. And after publishing the product, you need to pay on the 1st of next month, the bill will be generated. So if you have a GST number, it will be 20 cents. But if you don't have a GST number, it will be 20 cents plus 18%, which is 24 cents for 4 months. And the transaction fee is 5% if you have a GST number, that you need to pay after every sale. That is fixed. There is it's not fluctuating. And if you don't have a GST number, that will be 5 plus 18%, which is 5.9%. So this is the only difference if you don't have a GST. Otherwise, there is no compulsion.
Okay. And the next one is about what is the payment process for Etsy, and what are the things that a person should have in mind while setting up payments?
As I've already explained, for receiving the payment, you need to have a business PayPal account. And obviously, there are some charges for PayPal as well, which you can take as a third-party charge because it's not it's a charge of PayPal. So it is fluctuating depending on the transaction amount, which will be, I'll just give you the estimated rates, which will be between 3.33 till 8%. So it varies from the transaction to transaction. So you need to have a business PayPal for receiving the payments. And once you receive the payment, so everything is on advance payment basis. If somebody is placing an order, you'll first get the payment in your PayPal account. PayPal will transfer the amount to your bank. And once you receive the payment, you can dispatch the product, and then the buyer will get the payment. So you need to pay to Etsy not instantly. All the charges of per month, the next bill will be generated on the first month, as I've already explained. So whatever charge, for example, if you are paying if you are getting a sale of $100 in the month of November, obviously you need to pay $5 for that to Etsy. So that bill will be generated on the 1st of next month, which is 1st of December. And that you need to pay till 15th of December. So there is a billing cycle is 1 month, and the days which you have for making the payment is 15 days. So you can pay within 15 days. So this is a payment receiving and payment, like how you are going to pay to Etsy. Both are there.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Anushka. I'll take a couple of more questions for you, Rajeshwari, before we close the session. So we have a question from Ananya who's asking, how do you make sure that all your artisans are paid a fair wage, and how do you decide that fair wage?
Okay, so I think this is an interesting question, and this is what we have always strived towards. Like from day one, we thought that, you know, this is what we should be doing, and because we had started it purely out of passion and not as a business. So one thing is having a conversation with them. So, you know, trying and understanding. So if you are to make this product, how much would you charge? And if they say, okay, you know, I want to charge, say, 1,000 rupees. First thing is not to negotiate, because if they're saying it's 1,000, he's probably saying the price very less because he doesn't know what the product will sell out there in the market for. So first rule of like first principle that we have is we never negotiate. If he's saying it will take so and so time, so be it. Okay. And then even if that means that we actually have a very small margin on our products, so be it. And that's what we have actually followed all through Far East Art Studio. So that's one thing. The second is, how would you ensure that the weavers who work for a master weaver are also paid? Fortunately for us, we have worked with master weavers who are actually role models for the society, not just as craftsmen, but also in the society. They've gone like, you know, above and beyond to look after people, even though they were out of work in COVID, etc. And they have actually ensured that they look out for these people or look out for their employees and pay them a good salary or whatever, and look after their families, etc. And I think that's where we have consciously only connected with people who are in line with our principles or in line with our ethics. So it's for you to go out and ensure, and that you can do only by traveling and going to the places where you are making your products and making sure that they have good conditions to work with, and they are getting the right salaries or they are getting the right amount. And you, like, consciously, what we also do is part of our profits we invest in the area that we work in. We are a very small studio, but in our own small way we try to do that. Especially, I think this was useful during COVID because everyone was out of work, and that's what we try to do. And we've been able to do more so because we have actually been to the places where each of these things were made, and we travel quite extensively. Every 3 months we travel to a place, and we know what kind of conditions they work under. One other thing I think is very important is to have the empathy. Like, you know, if someone has made a sari for you, instead of saying that ship the sari immediately, if you know the conditions they live in, or they live in a village which is 40 kilometers far away from the city, you wouldn't make an unrealistic demand or have an unrealistic expectation for them to ship a product right away to you. You would wait, you would ask them to find the right time or to go to the city when it's more convenient for them. So developing that empathy will only come if you work very closely with them, and if you travel extensively. Like, we would prefer to go and live in these places for a few months where we make each of our saris, and probably that's what is our wish or goal in the future. And I think only then we can even fully appreciate the problems or the conditions that they actually have out there.
That's actually great, and I'm sure also on Etsy, what you can do is the buyers can also know that if you already become very transparent for with your buyers that it would take a month to deliver this or 2 months to deliver this, you can let them know well in advance so that they're not feeling that they're being cheated or they're being the seller is not communicating things well. So I'm sure that this way, whatever time that your artisan and the workers are taking to make a particular product, you can definitely go ahead and let the buyers also know. So thank you so much. That brings us to the end of this session. And thank you for the audience as well for being part of Small Talk with the Etsy Collective. Do let us know your thoughts about this session. You will receive a feedback form on your mail. And if there are any follow-up questions that are left that you want us to answer, do email us on tara@etsy.com and our team will get back to you. Tune in for the next session as well on 21st of November, which is with Tanya Srivastava about Best of Both Worlds, being a mompreneur. So if you haven't already, do sign up for this session as well, and do check out our social media handles for very regular updates about upcoming sessions. And a very festive season to everybody, and hope you wear beautiful traditional clothing and enjoy this festive season. Thanks a lot once again, and see you very soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.